Hello, welcome to Node-REDCon. So this is the English track, which hopefully, yes, we bring up the right overhead. Hello, so my name's Sam Machin. I'm going to be your host for this track for the next about 7 hours, I think we've got, of content. So we say this is the English track. So all the speakers are in English. In terms of time zones, we're talking about, we published on UTC, but we're kind of trying to cover as much of the globe as we can with this event. So it's just gone just after lunch in the UK, but hopefully we'll be picking up people from the rest of Europe, some of Asia, and then not too early for those people in the Americas. So yeah, we've got about 7 or 8 speakers, I think, today. Should explain, we did start a little late. We unfortunately had one of our speakers, Dimitro, had to cancel at the last minute. He's not well, so we wish him a speedy recovery. So we've dropped his talk out and just closed up the gap with the keynote. We will see if we can try and get his talk maybe recorded and put up on YouTube or something for later after the event. So, without too much ado, let's bring on our keynote speaker, Nick. So, if I get this right with StreamYard, yes, cool. Hi, Nick. How are you?
Very good, Sam. Very good. Good, great to see you.
Very well. Yeah, so I saw a little bit of your talk this morning in the Japan track, but we're looking forward to seeing what the state of Node-RED is and where we are in 2022. So, what I'll do is I shall drop off and hand it over to you.
Thanks. So there we are. So yes, welcome everyone, Node-REDCon 2022, the English track. For those of you who joined the start of the Japanese track that started, 9 o'clock this morning, the UK time, however many hours ago that was, I delivered this talk then for the start of that track. So really pleased to be able to welcome you all to this track and to Node-REDCon in particular. I think it's a great testament to the strength of the community and the project as a whole that we're able to put on an event like this for free. Just I should say a huge thank you to everyone behind the scenes who's helped make it today possible, particularly the Node-RED Japan user group members who led the way holding this event in previous years, but to be able to now hold broaden the event to have a dedicated English track as well as the great content from our friends in Japan, it's awesome to see. And I look forward to seeing how we can grow this again in the future. So I wanted to take this opportunity to just reflect a bit on the Node-RED project. Where are we at in 2022? What have we achieved? And touch a bit on some of the stuff we're thinking about at the moment. But really just to set the scene, there we are. Before I get too much into it, I should introduce myself for those who don't know me. So I'm Nick O'Leary. I'm the co-creator of Node-RED, and I continue to lead the project from the sense of helping give it a steer and help the community keep moving forward with it. But something that's really important to me is being part of the OpenJS Foundation, that Node-RED I wouldn't want anyone to think that Node-RED is just this project of a couple of people who are doing all the work type stuff. We really truly trying to build an open community around it and bring and invite anyone to get involved, come and talk to us. If you've got ideas, all that sort of stuff, we very much welcome that and encourage it. But yeah, that's me. Please do reach out to me if you do have any other questions about Node-RED and all that good stuff. But again, you're going to hear from lots of other speakers who all have great insight into Node-RED as well. So with that, Node-RED in 2022 so far, because it's only October. We've still got some time to go. And in fact, I've updated these numbers a couple of times this week as things have happened. This year, if you saw my talk last year, I did a similar sort of summary. This year, we've done 14 releases across the core Node-RED project. The core Node-RED repository, we've had 876 commits. And that's the number, I knew as soon as I put that number on a slide when I put this together on Monday, I'd have to keep it updating it. So I think 876 is pretty up to date for this week. 20 contributors. So that's 20 unique people who have actually made some contribution to the core of the project. And again, I keep saying the core of the project. Node-RED is so much more than just the core Node-RED repository. There's all the third-party nodes, and I'll touch on that in a minute. There's just so many different aspects that people can get involved, and it's quite hard to come up with a number of just how many people have contributed. There are tons of you. In terms of people involved in the core of Node-RED, 20s, yeah, that's awesome to see. People often ask, how many people are on working on Node-RED full time? And it's like, well, no one works on Node-RED full time. It is truly a community effort. People get involved as they can. Spare time, maybe it's part, a slice of their day job type of thing. Who knows? But we're able to achieve what we do largely through the open source community. And we recently hit our 9th birthday as an open source project. And in fact, Node-RED itself turns 10 years old in terms of that very first line of code I wrote in January. So in just 2 or 3 months away. But in terms of it being an open source project, that was September 9 years ago. And again, a summary of numbers of what we've achieved in that time. And it's awesome to see. And I know I'm going to keep saying it. We can only do this because of the community out there who believe in the project, who support it, who want to help it succeed. And whatever contribution people have to make, it doesn't have to be code, just ideas, support, whatever it might be. It all makes a difference to where we get to. This year, this is our published release schedule from the website. You can see how we shipped Node-RED 3.0, and I'll talk a bit about that in a minute. And according to our schedule, we've got 3.1 coming up in the next month or so. We're still doing maintenance releases for the 2.x stream, something we're, I think this is probably the first, over the last 18 months, since we started doing this process. I think we're refining it. We're getting better at doing the maintenance releases, getting the process in place for backporting fixes more actively rather than just backporting things when people need it. So yeah, we're getting better at that, and it's good to see. And we always thought it's been important to have this sort of statement of how long a particular version of Node-RED is supported for or will receive fixes. An important point just to draw on this is we chose this schedule to align ourselves with the Node.js release schedule, which you can see on the lower half of these slides. So we try to align our major release with when a particular version of Node reaches its end of life. Something just to highlight to the community to be aware of, for a number of upstream reasons, Node 16 is reaching its end of life 6 months earlier than the normal April of each year. So we haven't formally decided what we will do in the Node-RED project to reflect that, but I think all things considered, we won't modify our plans around that. We will continue to do Node-RED 4 next April, June time, where we drop Node 14, and we will continue to support Node 16 until we ship Node-RED 5 in 2024. But I just wanted to highlight, for those of you who are running in production, those who need to consider this stuff, just be aware that Node 16 goes end of life 6 months earlier. So it's still a year away. You've got plenty of time, but it's one of those things just to be aware of. As we look back over the last 9 years, npm stats of people typing npm install Node-RED, you can see just a nice steady. So these data points are per month, how many installs each month. And you can see a nice steady growth over time of people installing Node-RED. It's not just about people installing it in terms of the community. This is page views on our discourse forum, which has really taken off in a big way since we moved over to it from the Google group we had in the early days of the project. So, we're well into, about over 1 million 1.2 million page views each month. So there's a lot of activity on the forum. It's a great resource, and again, I'm so grateful to. There's so many people who spend the time on the forum helping others in the community, answering questions, chatting about ideas. It's a credit to the community, just the value it brings to helping users understand Node-RED, helping users succeed. And when we look at the growth of the community, how many people are just signing up to the forum each month, you can see we're getting 300 to 400 new users sign up every month onto the forum. Again, just testament to the value and what a important resource that is to the project. And this one kind of blew my mind. According to Docker Hub stats, which can be a little opaque, but since I think, according to the API, it says since October 2019, we've had, well, in fact, this was the number I showed in the Japan track this morning that I'd plucked off the stats a couple of days ago. I thought I'd better check it. We've now hit, in the last 3 days, we've breached 238 million Docker pools of the core Node-RED image. And that number just blows my mind. For effectively 3 years of existence of that particular image, it just, it blows my mind. It's incredible. So there's clearly a lot of people out there doing some really cool stuff with Node-RED. And that's one of the great things about this event today, is an opportunity to hear from people who do stuff with Node-RED, and just hear their stories as well. And it's not just the core of Node-RED. The modules, the main way that people contribute outside of the core is by publishing modules. So this is showing the growth of nodes listed in our flow library based on when they were first added. And you'd see we've only a couple months ago, we hit 4,000 third-party nodes on the flow library. A steady growth, not seeing any drop-off at the rate of people are continuing to share things on the flow library. The blue line here is looking at just a particular data point I pulled out related to something I'm coming on to, which is around the naming of those modules. So if you've been a Node-RED user for some time, you'll be familiar that the naming we advise, we strongly urge people to follow would be to call their modules Node-RED contrib something to help distinguish it from the core stuff. Well, one of the things we sort of brought in a change to that recommendation at the start of this year to recommend you take advantage of NPM scoped names. So that's where you can have like @flowforge/module name, which has a whole bunch of good reasons for it. It helps identify where the node has come from. It avoids clashes, ambiguity, all this sort of stuff. So that blue line just shows, as nodes have been added to the flow library, have they been using a scope name or not? And you can see since the start of 2022, a very slight uptick of nodes starting to use scope names following our guidelines, which is awesome to see. And it'll be great to see that increase to match the growth of the nodes themselves. So this relates back to the scorecards. Now, I know Pablo's doing a talk around the module ecosystem, so I'm not going to dwell too much on this. I don't want to take away from anything that he's going to talk to you about. But just in terms of some raw stats, since we added the scorecards to the flow library in January 2022, we've had, again, as of, I think, Tuesday this week, when I pulled this number out, 878 scorecards generated. So we're only generating the scorecards when a node gets updated. We haven't gone back and retrospectively generated scorecards for older nodes. But so we've had 878 nodes either added or updated on the flow library this year. And I thought it was interesting just to have a quick breakdown of some of the numbers behind that, of some of the tests that the scorecard looks at. Again, I'm not going to go through all of these in detail. There's a lot more about the scorecard on the Node-RED blog. And in fact, you can go look at the flow library and start looking at nodes and the scorecards, and it's got explanations for what all the different things mean. But I just wanted to highlight here, the bars which are shorter than perhaps we would like, which is to say, in terms of just raw percentage of how many of the nodes are passing this test versus the others. And the ones that highlighted that clearly I think we could do some more work around is nodes that include examples. So the ability to, in the import dialog in the Node-RED editor, there's an examples section, and it's possible for any node to include example flows to help demonstrate its use. So, we see about 30% of nodes actually include examples. So I think that's one of the things I think we should take some reflect on, perhaps why is that number as low as it is, or why isn't it higher, I should say. What more can we do to help encourage people to include examples, both within the editor? Is it intuitive enough or discoverable enough that the examples are there, or what else you could do? The other one is around identifying minimum Node-RED and Node.js versions. Now, nodes written for Node-RED 0.1 or whatever version we introduced third-party nodes in, they should pretty much just work in Node-RED today. And we go to great lengths to maintain backward compatibility in that sense. But equally, we add new features to Node-RED, so newer nodes might want to start taking advantage of those new features. So whilst Node-RED might be compatible with old nodes, new nodes might not be compatible with old versions of Node-RED. So it's, whilst there aren't lots of examples of that, it's an important feature for node authors to recognize they can specify these things, and again, help users avoid installing a node that isn't going to work because they're on an older version of something. So again, but otherwise, a lot of the other criteria, I think we've seen, as I watch nodes get published and their scorecards generated, I've certainly seen it's had a positive effect. Often I'll see a node get published and it might fail 2 or 3 things on the scorecard, and about half an hour later they'll publish another version and it's passing those things. So I think it is having a net benefit to what is being produced. But there's a lot more data for us to dig into to learn from. But I think I will leave that for another time. Node-RED 3.0. So this we released in July. As mentioned, and I'm sure many of you watching this now, Node-RED fans, you will already be well familiar with what's there. But I thought, for those people joining for who may not keep us up to date with the project as you or I, then just want to say a few bits. What did we get into 3.0? Again, a whole bunch of stuff. Thank you to all the contributors who made all this possible. The headline, the single breaking change we made was dropping support for Node 12 because it had reached end of life. But a lot of other stuff, new features, things like the Monaco text editor, which gives you really rich content assist in the function node. We've now made that the default text editor if your settings file doesn't specify anything. We've had it for a year or more, and it's been very stable for. We haven't had issues with nodes being incompatible with it. It just works. So we've now made that default. Other features, again, I'm not going to go through all these in great detail. Context menu in the editor. I mean, it's such a common, standard, expected bit of user interface, but it took us 9 years to get there. But it unlocks so much capability in the editor that's always been there, or has grown over time. But it just helps users discover features that are available, which is half the battle. We spend a lot of time adding new features to the editor, but if a user doesn't know it's there, then it doesn't help them. So, again, I know it sounds so simple, but it does actually unlock a lot of potential. Node junctions. So the new junction node allows you to simplify the wiring to try and avoid some of the nests of spaghetti you can get. Now, there's more improvements to come. I think they help in some scenarios. They don't always work as well as they might. And before people ask, they don't work on touch screens, and we have an issue, and we will get that solved. But certainly laying the groundwork for just trying to help manage what can otherwise get quite complicated in the visual flow. Debug path tooltips, in the debug node, hopefully you're familiar. Any debug node, you can click its name in the top right corner and it takes you to that node. We've added a tooltip which actually shows you exactly where that node is. Maybe you don't want to jump to it. Maybe you just need to know where it's coming from. Or maybe you want to, particularly when you've got subflows and you might have lots of nested subflows, it really makes it easy to see just where that node is, and you can click on any of those entries in the tooltip and it takes you to that thing. So again, just helping users navigate the editor. Continuous search, another feature that we're all used to having in different applications. Now you have it in Node-RED, so when you search for something in the editor, you can now navigate the search results without having to reopen the search, do the search again, remember which one you'd got to last time, and then go to the next. So it makes it much easier to navigate around. I'm just, there we are. So Node-RED 3.0 and a bunch of other stuff. I mean, like I said, I'm not going to get into the detail. There is the blog post. If you haven't seen it yet, there's a video with me talking at you about these features and demoing a lot more of them. So please do take a look. So what's next? That's 3.0. I talked a bit about the timeline. We've got 3.1 coming in the next month or so, would be my guess. We try to do these releases every 3 months. So much is dependent on the people who are available to spend time delivering these features. So that's kind of our main limiting factor at the how we can schedule the Node-RED releases. But we say we try and do one of these releases every 3 months just to give us a focal point for trying to pull together and get things merged and get things delivered. And there's a lot of good stuff on its way. And I just wanted to touch on some of the stuff that's being developed or not even developed yet. Some stuff we've started talking about in the community, and a couple of things that are sort of on my mind in particular that I think we as a project should start addressing for ourselves. This is again just a sampling of the stuff kind of actively being worked on, actively being thought about. This isn't an exhaustive list. There's always more stuff than we could just list out here. But yeah, let's touch on some of these for a bit. So first up is the ability to lock flows. Over the life of the project, we've often been asked questions around user permissions within the editor, that people would like the ability for a user to be prevented from making changes to certain parts of the flows. And I think, we haven't gone down that route because our permissions model didn't necessarily work well with trying to prevent changes to individual things in the flow. But a discussion with the Japan user group, in fact, led us to this approach, which kind of changes it on its head slightly, which is to say, rather than trying to use user permissions to lock things, what if you can just lock a flow in the flow format? Just like you can disable nodes and flows. So just have a simple locked property of the flow. And if it's locked, then it can't be changed. So that's the piece of work we're doing at the moment. And In fact, this is the one I've been tackling on my weekly Twitch live stream for the last couple of weeks and will continue to. The idea here is any flow in the editor, in its edit dialog, like it has the enable disable toggle, it has a lock or unlock toggle. And if it's locked, then you can't make any changes to any of the nodes on it. Now, there are a couple of different reasons or use cases for this. As an individual developer, you might want to prevent yourself from accidentally making changes to a critical set of flows. Just by adding this lock, it adds an extra step that you actually have to unlock it in order to make changes. So you can't accidentally deploy something that you didn't mean to. So that works well for an individual. When you have a team of users, or perhaps you want to have more control, something we will look at, probably not in 3.1, but as a follow-on piece of work this would enable, is with the Node-RED security we have, where you can give users permissions. Right now, those permissions are simply read-only or write. That's as fine-grained as our permissions extend. But the technology is there to be able to add different other scopes of permission. So one potential development on this feature in the future will be to have a user who is allowed to make changes. They have write permission, but they aren't allowed to unlock anything. So there you would have, particularly in a cloud environment where they don't have command line access, you can have an environment where some users then are prevented from modifying flows, and nor can they unlock it. So that gets interesting in environments like, perhaps in education settings where you're trying to teach someone something and you have some flows that they shouldn't modify and some flows they should, and you just want to avoid them breaking things, as well as in production environments. Again, you can have some protection around the critical parts of your flow. And a lot of this work can then also feed into the read-only user. The current user experience for read-only users is not ideal, in that the user doesn't know they're a read-only user until they try hitting the deploy button to make some changes. At which point, the runtime says, no, you're not allowed to change anything. Now, if you've logged in as the wrong user, unaware, and you've just spent half an hour making a whole bunch of changes, and suddenly you find yourself unable to write those changes, that isn't ideal. So a lot of the work around locking flows and preventing any editor actions in the editor is something we could look at reusing for when a user is logged in as read-only, so that they can't make any changes. They can't accidentally spend a bunch of time doing work only to find it gets rejected by the deploy button. So we can improve that user experience. Again, I don't know if that will be incorporated into 3.1, but these are the sorts of things this work is going to unlock. Oh, and I should add, each of these slides, I've put the link at the top to where the discussion about the items happening. So in our designs repository, there's a GitHub discussions forum where we post discussions around these sort of high-level design features, either as discussions in that forum or as pull requests in that repository with more formal sort of design notes. So you'll see a bit of a mix between those two approaches in that forum. But yeah. So global environment variables, this is another piece of work already in development. So Node-RED does let you set environment variables on individual flows or groups or subflows. This is kind of filling in the missing piece, which is being able to set global environment variables from within the editor. You can do it today by editing your settings file, but again, each time you have to edit your settings file, you sort of lose a lot of that low-code nature of Node-RED. And it also makes it more difficult in cloud-hosted environments where you don't have access to the settings file. So the idea here is either in the user settings or somewhere else. Yeah, that it's currently in user settings. I'm not sure that's quite the right place, but anyway, point being, somewhere you'll be able to edit a list of environment variables that will get applied across all the flows. And then this work will introduce a new configuration node type, a global config node, that will store these environment variables actually in your flow. So when you export your flows, these envars can come with it. Now that's really useful and it's a neat feature. Because I'm always looking at, if we add this feature, what does it enable? What else does it unlock? Adding in the concept of this global configuration node to store these environment variables actually gives us a space to hold other metadata about your flows as a whole, which we haven't had before. Again, no specific plans about what that means, but it means we've got this ability that we've not had before to store metadata that applies to the whole set of flows. So it'd be interesting to see what that unlocks in terms of other features. Splitting up the flow file. So this is one that has been on our backlog for a long time. We recognize, storing the flows as a single JSON blob has its conveniences when it's just a single file, but it does also cause some challenges, particularly around version control. And if you're not, even if you're using the projects feature we provide in Node-RED with version control integrated, it's still, once you're outside of Node-RED, managing a single blob of JSON in a version control system is not ideal, particularly when you've then got to deal with other people merging changes. Merging changes in a JSON file is not fun. Things like because it's JSON, the function node with all its nice laid out code is in the JSON file as a single line of text. There's no line breaks getting coded, so you lose all the ability. If you've got a long function node and another colleague deploys a change which makes some changes to that code, well, you end up having to merge changes in single lines of text, which is not a great user experience. Now, we've seen the community address this in different ways for themselves, from things like, I think, Node-RED Contrib Flow Manager that does the work to split flows out into individual files. We've seen, I know there are people in the community who have a bunch of custom scripts, bash scripts and the like, that they run as a pre or post processor on the JSON file before they put it into version control, that does the work to split it out and bring it back together. So it's great that people are able to come up with their own solutions, but it does kind of feel like something Node-RED ought to help you do for yourself. So this isn't one we've got a specific plan on, but I did want to just highlight it as it's one of those that has sort of finds itself nearing the top of my mental list of where to spend some energy trying to come up with an approach that's going to be suitable for the different use cases. Another issue, another item, this one's already merged. So this will be in 3.1. Again, came out of feedback from the Node-RED Japan Enterprise User Group. So you will have already noticed, I hope, when using Node-RED, that we changed the URL fragment, the bit at the end after the hash, with the ID of whatever flow you're on, so that it means you can come back to the editor and it opens up the appropriate flow. Well, what we've added in this particular pull request is the ability to pretty much do that for nodes and groups. So by using a fragment of hash node and then its ID, or hash group and its ID, when you open up the editor will find that node or group and make sure it's in the center of your view, wherever it might be. So that's really handy if you're, for example, writing a tutorial or you're collaborating with someone and you want them to have a look at a particular node. You don't have to tell them, right, it's on this flow, it's scroll down to the bottom, go into the right corner. Yeah, you can send them a link to link straight to it. And what we've also added for both flows, nodes, and groups is if you add /edit to the end of the URL, it will not only take you to that thing, but it will then open up the edit dialog for that thing. Again, useful for if you're building a tutorial or something like that, and you want to direct a user to a particular node's configuration. And to help with this, in the info sidebar, whenever you've got a node selected, we've added this new button, which will copy to your clipboard the URL for that node. Making it, again, super easy to start accessing this. And as I mentioned, that's already merged. So if you are using Node-RED from Git, make sure you're in the dev branch where we work on 3.1, and you can already see that in action. And then one more, the Node-RED flow testing framework. So this is an identical slide that I presented a year ago at Node-REDCon 2021. This has been a piece of work in discussion for a long time. As you can see, that photo is from a whiteboard in my office at IBM when I was there, but from almost 3 years ago, where we sort of sketched out what the flow testing framework should be. And this is very much about Node-RED as a low-code environment. And just because it's low code, that doesn't mean you shouldn't be testing your code. It doesn't mean you don't want the ability to build unit tests, be able to have some sort of test automation to verify your flows are working, all that good stuff. Now you can do that in code. We provide the node test helper, which does let you write tests for flows, but you're writing it in code. So it kind of gets you out of the low code environment of Node-RED. So this will be tooling within the editor as a plugin that actually lets you create test cases within the editor. You define test cases, you define inputs and outputs and what sort of tests to verify things looking good. There's some development work has been done on it, but I think there's quite a bit more to be done. And it's kind of dropped off the priority list in terms of getting 3.0 out and a whole bunch of other concerns. But it's still, I wanted to bring it up because it's still, I see it as an important missing piece of the overall story of Node-RED, and something that can actually help differentiate it from a lot of the other low-code platforms out there in terms of, it's all well and good making it super easy to create flows, but as developers, we know the importance of having tests and the importance of verifying the behavior of your system. So yeah, I think it'll be awesome when we get it. And that's it really. Like I said, this was a bit of a reflection on Node-RED as a project. What have we achieved in this year? And some of the stuff we've been actively thinking about. But yeah, I really wanted to say thank you, not just those watching now. Thank you for coming and watching the talk, but thank you to everyone in the Node-RED community for the contributions you make, whatever that contribution might be, from helping make code contributions, getting involved in the forum, supporting other users in the community, writing nodes, sharing them, whatever it might be. You've all made a huge difference to what Node-RED, my little side project from 10 years ago, which has long since outgrown me. You've all made and continue to make a big difference. So thank you very much. I'm sure many of you, if you're familiar with Node-RED, know how to get hold of me and get in touch. But again, I'll plug. I do live stream 8 p.m. UK time every Monday, pretty much, and I spend an hour or so just doing some Node-RED development work. And again, that's grown into quite a nice little group of people who are there each week in the chat, and we just have a chat about what we're doing, and people watch me open up cans of worms of issues that I really regret doing on a live stream in public, but it's all good and it's all good fun. So yeah, if you're interested in seeing more, please do join there. Otherwise, enjoy the rest of this stream. You know, there's plenty of awesome talks to come. Yeah, a big, if I don't get an opportunity to drop back on towards the end, you know, a huge thank you to everyone for giving up their time to make today possible. And thank you all for watching the stream. And with that, I will hand over.
Well timed. Perfect. I got that right. Cool. Thank you, Nick. Excellent. So we've got a few questions. We're going to start with an icebreaker, and so I can test. Yes, that works. From Pablo. Is Nick's jacket color Node-RED red? What I was actually wondering is what came first, the project or the hoodie? Was it more you had the hoodie, we'll name the project, it matches? Or?
You know what? If you go back and watch the Node-RED release videos, 9 times out of 10, I am wearing this red hoodie, and that isn't accidental. But I will admit, I bought this hoodie after. Yeah, this is not a 10-year-old hoodie. It is not quite the right shade of red, but
yeah,
it matches. But no, it is
okay.
My own subtle little nod to the project.
It's the branding. Okay, so on to some more detailed questions. So from Shan D. Hi, Nick. Is there some roadmap on whether the Node-RED editor would support a federated approach, single editor on device, showing flows from different devices without logging into these devices? So this is, I guess, that separation of editor and runtime and editing in different places.
Yeah. I will say up front, to directly answer the question, no, that's not something we've got a roadmap for, but it is certainly something we've talked about and has had some different amounts of discussion in the community. I think Sam alluded to some of the work around splitting the editor from the runtime, so you can run the editor as a sort of a standalone application and be able to point it to Node-RED instances elsewhere to actually edit their flows. And we did do, a lot of engineering a few years ago to go a long way to enabling that. But I think there remain some challenges we've not necessarily gone back to revisit. And also, it kind of needs a specific use case to build for, rather than trying to build a very general solution. And I think that's the bit kind of lacked the justification, if you like, to spend time trying to solve that very specific problem when we have just so much other things we could do with Node-RED. But I'd always love to hear what sorts of ideas the community have in that space. I would sort of say, with my day job hat on at FlowForge, this is something with, again, not quite fully federated, but thinking about how you can manage editing flows that you then want to push out to multiple devices. I know there are other platforms who offer that type of thing. So yeah, I think it's interesting.
Definitely stuff in that space. It's just which way around it's done. Cool. Okay. Next one, very quickly. A +1 for global variables. I think it was the environment variables. Definitely lots of positive comments on that one. Really, it seems something people are excited about. Okay. A more question. So this was talking about the locked flows tab. And actually, it was it's an interesting question to me. Do the blocked or locked flows apply to a full deploy? So if you, I guess, does that mean they restart when you do a full deploy if they're locked still?
So that is a good question. I don't think we've particularly put any thought as to why, if they should behave any differently. So an important point would be the runtime. So if it was simply the editor stopped you making changes, that would go so far. But it's going to be an important part of this, that the runtime API, the HTTP endpoint that the editor sends flows to, it will prevent changes being made to locked flows as well. Because otherwise, someone could just handcraft an appropriate request to the API to update whatever they wanted. So to make sure this has some degree of security involved, we will be updating the runtime API to prevent updates to flows. Now, we haven't quite got that figured out yet, but yeah. And then to your question about whether it applies to a full deploy, I mean, yeah, I'm currently of the mind that at that point, it's the same as any other flow. So if you do a full deploy, everything gets stopped and restarted. And if you wanted to do a more selective deploy, then you would use one of the other existing modes we have.
Yep, absolutely. I think there's a lot of people that even realize that there is that ability in the deploy menu to only deploy your changed nodes. Until if you're not familiar with it, yeah, if you're on the drop down on the red deploy button, there's a couple of other options in there. So next time, go and have a play. It amazes me still. I still find stuff. I've been using Node-RED daily for I don't know how many years now, and there's still things where I discover, oh, didn't know that was there. Okay, a similar actually from the same poster, Clear, but it's a related question, which I thought was quite interesting. So, could we lock a flow with a password? So this was when you were talking about the sort of the user permissions and users being able to not edit specific flows or classes of users, and yeah, just the idea of maybe a simple password on a flow.
We've chosen not to take that approach, certainly for this initial piece of work, which doesn't prevent us from exploring that in the future. But from having looked at password securing things like subflows, we spent a bunch of time looking at a couple of years ago now, before we introduced subflow modules, the ability to publish a subflow as an NPM node. There was quite a lot of discussion around password securing them, encrypting them, all these sorts of things. And it gets quite hard to do that right, for it to be actually secure. Because, yeah, given a user can just copy the JSON by hand and remove whatever flag you've put on it, we've got to be mindful of how far this actually secures things, and be careful not to add something that makes you feel like it's more secure than it actually is, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So that's why I sort of emphasized the locking primarily will be just helps you avoid accidental modification of flows. Once you get to password type stuff, then you've got to be much more rigorous, and it's got to be much more you're at that point you're trying to stop malicious changes, and yes, it gets much more complicated.
It's not just one of those these little suitcase lock type of things that doesn't really stop anybody. Okay, next one. I'm trying to remember exactly which piece this is up, but talking about the history of changes in nodes. I think this was when you were talking about splitting the flow file and that sort of diffing and spotting what's gone on. So I think, yeah, that's something related to version control and stuff.
Yeah, so certainly one of the discussions that is on the designs forums I alluded to is improving the storage API that sits underneath Node-RED to provide, well, to learn from the shortcomings of our existing storage API, which is invisible to many end users. But one of the things I learned when we introduced the projects feature in Node-RED, this optional mode that gives you version control of flows in the editor, is that's done outside of our normal storage API, which makes it not very portable for when you want to run Node-RED, perhaps with a database behind it rather than a local file system. So this is one of those aspects of splitting the flows file, is actually how much of that do we just do in our local file system storage implementation, or is there actually something at the API level between Node-RED and the storage that helps, including what can we learn from the projects feature to improve that API so we can have version control that doesn't rely on files on disk, that it could be a database, but you can still get in the Node-RED editor a history of changes and all that sort of stuff. So that is one of the design discussions I've kicked off in the designs repository, and I would I've kicked off, but then other things have taken over. It's part of the splitting the flow files conversation to go back and revisit some of the discussion there.
Cool. Okay. Another one from Shan. So lots of comments. Is there a discussion around credentials in exported flows? That's something we've talked about a little bit in the last couple of weeks. Yeah, credentials are removed for security purposes. Again, well, back to the security questions, but yeah. Credentials and exports.
Yes. So, I mean, you've touched on. It's an important point, and we made the decision very early on that we would never return credentials back to the editor, just so that we would never accidentally leak a password or an API token. If someone hadn't secured the editor properly, but they put it on the internet, then we provide some amount of protection. That said, I absolutely understand the pain that can then cause of when you want to take, you might be in your own entirely secure, locked down environment, and you want to export your flows from one place to another, and the credentials don't come with you. I think we are very aware of that as a limitation. Yes. And yes, there have been some discussions around, okay, what can we do in the editor to support you exporting your credentials in a secure way? Again, I don't have a specific piece to report back to you, but it is one I'm aware of, and it is one we've been talking about. I expect some movement in that in the near future as well.
Cool. Okay. We've got to go into a break, but we'll carry on if you're all right with a couple of others, because so end-to-end tests from Tobias. Yes, how to eat. This was again talking about the node testing framework, but the flow testing framework. Sorry.
Yeah, look, testing is a huge subject. I think we're going to be realistic as to how much we can achieve in a low-code environment, but the model the model we're taking is a case of, given my flows, I will define a test case, and in this test case, I will simulate inserting a message at this point with these properties, and then add a when it gets to this other point in the flow, verify that the message looks has these other properties set, or whatever it might be. So when you talk end-to-end testing, I guess it depends what ends you mean. But we want to try and build something that is flexible enough for you to create simple tests that can inject a message at one end, check what it looks like at the other end, the ability to stub nodes in the middle of a flow. So you might have a database node in the middle, and when you run your tests, you don't want to actually talk into that database. So be able to tell Node-RED, replace that node with this behavior. So maybe say, instead of calling that database node, if you receive a message that looks like this, send on a message that looks like that. For those familiar with testing, effectively writing a stub module for a node, but doing that in a low code, accessible way. I mean, that's some of the real user experience, UX design challenges around the test framework. But I think those sorts of tests would go a long way to plugging some of the gaps. But I do recognize it will have its limitations at the level at which it just makes more sense to write tests in the more traditional way, and whatever framework you choose to write them in. But we're trying to explore that space to see what makes sense.
Cool. Okay, let's pick just out of order, but Another new commentator, Mahmoud. Hi from Turkey. Wonder about the future of Turkish language interface development and documentation. He needs this. I think you may have just volunteered yourself, Mahmoud. But I'll let Nick.
As a community, we have no dedicated resources for producing translations. So that's one in particular where we do appeal to the community for your support, your help. If you want to get involved by spending a couple of evenings translating a few 100,000. Sorry, not 100,000. A few 100, maybe 1,000 strings into your preferred language, then we would love that, and even help if we can help facilitate bringing multiple people together from a particular interest in a particular language. Then that's something we would happily try and help you guys coordinate.
Absolutely, and it definitely helps to have a couple of people working on that, just because trying to review a PR for translation when you don't speak the language is a bit of a guess as well.
That is something we say, that we do occasionally get people who do this, and we do say to them, thank you for your pull request. We would like to get someone else who natively speaks that language to cast an eye over it. Otherwise, we're very conscious of it's always interesting to see, even in the established languages like the German translations, how much iteration they go through in terms of trying to find the most appropriate translation of a term and then getting it consistent across the whole platform. It's a real challenge, but we look to the community to help us.
Okay, we'll whiz through the last couple very quickly because only two, and they've probably kept very short. We're trying to finish in 2 minutes. So, oops, except I've just deleted that one, but it was asking about WebAssembly and Node-RED. So if you want to there we go. And Node-RED and WebAssembly, are they a match band to happen? Have we done anything with WebAssembly and Node-RED?
I'm not sure there's anything particular we would do in the core for it, but certainly it's a really interesting space, being able to create nodes in WebAssembly. There's nothing stopping people from doing that today. One of the main challenges, and it applies to WebAssembly, it applies to worker threads, all these other things that enable you to get more performance, is actually often for Node-RED, the overhead is the data passing through the flow. And if you've got a really large message, if you have a WebAssembly node, there is always going to be a cost getting that data into the WebAssembly. The WebAssembly might be super fast, but there's always going to be this barrier cost. Anyway, sorry, I could go on about that for hours, and I shouldn't.
Sounds like a good Monday night stream on or something on WebAssembly. Cool. Okay, I think that's pretty much it for you. I was just gonna do a quick shout. There's one Live Up Rainbow has asked about LoRaWAN, and I thought maybe I just while the question was there, I was going to bring up. So obviously, Node-RED, huge third-party ecosystem. So a quick search on flows.nodred.org for LoRa does show a couple of nodes there. Live Art Rainbow. So hopefully there's something for your, I think, or jump on the forums, ask questions there on that. Cool. Awesome. Okay. Oops. Let's bring that one off. Right. I shall say goodbye to you, Nick, and we've got about a quick 5 minute break before we bring Sahil on the next talk.
Awesome.
Thanks a lot.
Well, thank you, everyone. Enjoy the rest of the stream.
Thanks, Nick. Bye.